This time on Watchers of Tomorrow, we see what happens when you punch a god.
Hello, I am Geff, and I am joined today by Dr. Isix.
Hi!
And we are watching through Star Trek. We just got to Where No Man Has Gone Before.
The original pilot to the series Star Trek, the original series.
So famous that the title was even put into the opening dialogue of the theme song.
To boldly go where no man has gone before.
Exactly, though actually the title for this pilot was taken out of that after it was written, so I guess it's the other way from what I just said.
Yep.
So yes, this is the pilot episode, even though it was aired third.
Just that out of order business once again.
Yes, which is which was working out, but now it's a little weird.
Especially since there's different characters and the outfits are all different and some of the sets have changes.
Yeah, so we're gonna get into a few of the different characters here in a minute, but for anyone who's not watching along directly with us, all of the uniforms are a bit different. They're in weird little turtleneck things. All the colors are slightly off. The women's uniforms have pants in this episode.
Yeah, it sort of suggests that maybe the TV execs are like, gotta get rid of the pants or something like that, but I'm not sure on that.
Yeah, I don't know. I did find a really creepy promo that Shatner did for this episode a while back where he goes on and on about the miniskirts.
Oh dear.
Yeah. Shatner's a bit
Yeah. And he's gotten more over time, but anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, this is the second pilot.
Mm-hmm.
The first one to feature every character in the series except for Spock, who is a carryover from the first pilot.
Yes. Strange alien Vulcan person.
Yes, it is missing a couple of characters. McCoy was not yet the Doctor.
Correct.
Uhura was nowhere to be found.
Mm-hmm.
I believe those are the main two.
And Chekhov is all still a ways off, so he's like season 2, right?
He's season 2. So Chekhov is immaterial.
Yeah.
So yes, after the first pilot was rejected, they made this one with Kirk and a bunch of people that Roddenberry had worked with on his previous television show called The Lieutenant.
Yes.
A couple of little things. This was written for television by Samuel A. Peoples.
Peoples. Have you been peoplesed?
And just an interesting tidbit, they really wanted to get this pilot right. So the two of the executive producers went out and found the best cameraman they possibly could to handle the cinematography. And it was Ernest Haler, who actually won an Oscar for his direction of photography on Gone with the Wind.
Nice.
So they got some real talent to try to lock in the series for this episode.
Some supreme badasses.
This week's episode is guest starring Gary Lockwood as Mitchell, and Sally Kellerman, who actually herself later got an Oscar nomination for her role in the movie version of MASH.
Oh, yeah.
Though that, I believe, came out in 1970, so a bit after we're working with here.
2 years off. And she was playing Dr. Elizabeth Denner, right?
Yes, Danner. I couldn't understand her name the entire time they were saying.
Yeah, same here. I spelled it a certain way in my notes, but as I was going through the various websites and things like that on the episode, after I was like, oh, there's like an H in there. What?
Yes, her name is. I'm gonna call her Danner for some reasons that I'll get into near the end. I think that's how they were pronouncing it. It is spelled Dehner.
Yep.
I don't know how you're supposed to pronounce that. I guess it's a future name.
Future name!
So, are we ready to jump into the synopsis for the original pilot third episode weirdness that is this?
Let's roll.
Captain's log. Kirk and company have found an impossible distress signal from a ship that went missing 200 years ago and may have traveled outside of the galaxy as the Enterprise is intending to do.
So, alrighty, I got some issues with this.
Yeah.
So this is supposed to be taking place in the mid-2200s, right?
Yes.
Like 2265,
I believe something around there.
All right, so that means that this spaceship is, popping up 200 years before that. So it's like 2060 something.
Yes.
So that means that you got, not only warp drive then, some means to get to the edge of the galaxy, but you also have it being advanced enough that they can actually make it there in a reasonable amount of time. Now, I know this is the pilot and they don't have like anything established yet, but this seems, even then, it's kind of sloppy.
A little. I guess 2060 something at this point was almost 100 years out.
The distant future.
Also in First Contact, which I know is much later. We're not working with a bunch of canonical stuff here. Yeah. But I believe that the first warp experiment was 2063.
So 2 years later, they were already at the edge of the galaxy.
But then the Vulcans visited immediately, so who knows what happened with the technology. We can kind of ignore Enterprise, because who needs that?
We'll ignore it until we have to not.
Yes. All right, we enter the ship with Spock and Kirk playing chess. Kirk tells Spock that he is irritating, and Spock is puzzled by these Earth emotions.
Yes, these Earth emotions, like you've not heard about irritation before, Spock. You're supposed to be the smart guy.
Not.
Of course, he is kind of still irritated by what happens in a moment, but
Yes, he informs Kirk that he has a better understanding of human emotions than other Vulcans may because one of his ancestors was human.
Which is, more of that's established later, but not this episode.
The Ridge informs Kirk that they have found the object that they are tracking and that it is in range and small enough to be brought aboard. Scotty, which is the first time we've seen him pop up in the series so far, beams the ship recorder on board. It begins blinking and transmitting, and everyone panics, and then the credits roll.
It's like, all right, everybody freak out because it's sending out messages. Wasn't it already doing that?
I know. I was watching this, and it starts beeping. I watched these with my girlfriend the first time so we can talk it over through the week, and she just looks up, like, wasn't it supposed to do that?
Shrug?
It's like, why are they all panicking? And they're not in the next scene.
Yeah, just everything's better next, a few moments later, effectively. Yep. Before we go on, I will also like to draw attention to Scotty running the transporters, which is sort of the weird trend, which is repeated later with, O'Brien when he goes from being the guy in charge of the transporters to being the chief engineer badass.
That's true. It seems like whoever understands the transporters can run the entire ship's engine.
Yes, which I guess kind of makes sense because transporters are kind of the most magical of all the techs on board. So.
Yeah, they are kind of implied to be weirdly complicated.
You got supercomputers that have all this memory buffers that if you don't get things out of it in a certain amount of time, they degrade, and it's sort of this weird juggling act or spinning plates on sticks sort of things, and it's just like, wow.
Yeah, they really do kind of turn into that, whatever the writers need them to be at the time device.
Yes.
Kirk and Spock run into the turbolift, and they are followed by someone who is introduced as Mitchell, who runs into the turbolift after them to go to the bridge.
He's quite eager.
Spock begins working on the tapes from the ship recorder that they just picked up as they approach the edge of the galaxy.
Ooh.
The heads of department centers.
All of the heads, including people we've never seen before.
Yes. We have a random doctor who we've never seen before and will never see again.
Yes, I noted his name somewhere down further in my notes, but I don't remember what it is at this moment.
Okay, I didn't even bother.
He's random doctor number 2.
We had Dr. Daner, a psychologist who is studying the crew's reaction to stress.
Well, you're on the right ship.
And Sulu, who is currently the ship's physics officer.
Yep, not like helmsman, which will be later, right?
Yes. Dr. Daner says that she is studying the crew for stress, and then as they begin working on the tapes from the other ship, she runs up and says if that crew was also stressed, she'd like to know what their reaction was.
Yeah, so how you listen to the tapes yourself, lady? Come on.
Well, apparently their reaction is they're all dead.
Yes. Oh, yeah, there's, so the Valiant went out, and then, it encountered something and came back, and it's all sketchy, and Spock's, like, listening to all this stuff in, like, super speed or something like that, and it's kind of a weird scene.
It is very weird, especially with this. Mitchell, I think, tries to flirt with Daner. I copied this out of the transcript so that I could just quote it, because I'm still not sure. We've been talking about this. I'm still not sure what these two lines mean. Mitchell to Daner: improving the breed, doctor, is that your line? Daner: I heard that's more your specialty, Commander, line included. Burn?
I guess?
I don't know what either of those means. I assume it was flirtatious, maybe, but it's very I just don't get it. I have no idea.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is like awkward future slang or like past slang from the 60s that I'm not familiar with.
Or a little bit of both.
Could be. So, Mitchell then refers to
So
Tanner
moving on.
yes. Mitchell refers to Tanner as a walking freezer unit.
Real pleasant.
Yeah, that will continue. Spock reports that the tapes indicate that the missing ship, the Valiant, was swept out of the galaxy by a magnetic storm and encountered an unknown force.
Freaking magnets, man.
Yeah, this is a thing. I didn't quite think of this until this scene, but Star Trek has this habit of trying to make space the ocean.
Yep.
They have magnetic storms, like subspace something or other reeves.
Eddies and things like that.
Yes, they really want space to be the ocean.
Space is space, man.
Well, no one knows what's in space. There's magnetic storms and whatever the heck we're about to encounter here.
Yep. Which is still a very good question what we encounter next.
Yes. Apparently, the captain of the Valiant was requesting a lot of information on ESP in humans. Extrasensory perception.
Mind bullets.
Dr. Daner says that she has a higher than average ESP rating and informs us of the, quote, facts of ESP. Some people can sense the future and read the backs of playing cards. Spock continues to report that the missing ship had more and more frantic requests for information about ESP before the captain ordered the ship to self-destruct.
Seems like an overreaction, but yes.
Yeah, possibly. Kirk, apparently not caring that much, orders Warp 1 to leave the galaxy.
Yeah, they had some trouble out there. Let's go check it out.
Yes. The Enterprise encounters purple.
Yes, lots of purple. It's everywhere.
The purple damages the ship and makes some of the consoles begin to explode.
Yes, kaboomies.
It's
Kablammers.
just massive explosions with sparks and everything. Which is just, I only noted that down because that seems to be a continuing trend through all of Star Trek.
These consoles are not really safe to be around, just so you know, guys. Also, you get to work in front of it all day.
This is just the thing. I know it's just the way the show works, but it's always been just hilarious to me that, like, the console seems to be so integral to however the systems on the ship function that when that system goes down, the display that controls it has to explode.
It doesn't just turn off. It doesn't just, like, go blank. It kind of explodes. It's like you have to have all the power running to your engines, going through your console on the other end of the ship.
Apparently that's just how antimatter engines work. Mitchell and Dr. Daner are hit by more purple and they both fall down.
Zaps.
After the ship is done shaking around, it's reported that both of them are alive, but 9 other people have died and the ship's engines are dead. Mitchell is revealed to now have sparkly silver eyes.
The spooky eyes. You can see through your soul.
Possibly.
We'll find out later.
We fade out and we get the next captain's log.
Captain's log. Bunch of our ship fell off, and nobody likes me.
The Enterprise is crippled. Kirk wonders what destroyed the Valiant, because it seems that both ships survived the barrier, but the Valiant was destroyed later on. Daner brings autopsy reports and wonders why only certain people were killed by passing through the barrier. Spock says that all the crew who were affected had a high ESP rating, and that Mitchell had the highest ESP rating out of all of them.
So it's like some sort of special selection was going on. Those with the potential for metapsychic powers were being touched by some unknown force.
Apparently. Daner, defending ESP, says that people who have it only have occasional insights. But Spock reports that they can also start small fires.
Let's just burn, baby, burn, eh?
And while normal ESP may be harmless, there could be another kind.
Some sort of dangerous, more potent ESP. At this point, they had brought up the mention of espers, right? That's sort of describing
Yes.
the folks with ESP.
Yes, which is just reading ESP and putting an on the end,
Yes.
I suppose. So it's not really mentioned much after this either.
And of course, because it hasn't been established that Vulcans like do the mind meld stuff, Spock's just kind of left out entirely on all of this.
Yeah, well, he doesn't have human ESP.
Yes, he has alien ESP.
Mitchell is now lying in sickbay, reading on a monitor.
Mm-hmm.
Kirk comes in to check on him, and they quip about old times, with Mitchell saying that he's finally catching up on some of the reading that Kirk apparently used to do at the academy, because he's really a big-time intellectual.
Yes, he's a book with legs, I think it was described.
A stack of books with legs.
Oh yes, stack of books.
Yes. Apparently, Kirk used to teach at the academy.
As Lieutenant Kirk.
Yes, Lieutenant Kirk. And Mitchell says the only way he passed his class was by sending a little blonde lab technician at him.
So, let Kirk lead with his pants, apparently.
Yes, Kirk says that he apparently almost married this woman. Which I don't even know what this was all for, just establishing them as old creep friends from creepy school.
Yep, the Starfleet Academy, where, using other people to get good grades was a thing, and not against ethics at all in the future.
Kirk refers to Mitchell's reading of Spinoza, who is a person who thinks about things. I'm blanking on names. Philosopher, thank you. Who is a philosopher that we'll get into a little later, because I think this is an interesting one. Mitchell calls Spinoza childish and says that he disagrees with him entirely. Mitchell seems to be growing in intellectual capacity because on the bridge they watch him reading complex works and calling them simple, and reading very, very quickly.
Faster and faster as the moments go by.
Yes. He complains to Kirk about the idea of Dr. Daner, as she's not very nice. And he tells Kirk that he can do better with nearly 100 women on board.
Yep.
Now, this was actually kind of interesting to me because in the last episode of Charlie X, they referenced the Enterprise having about 420 crew members.
Yes.
So there's apparently a little less than a fourth of the crew.
100 plus.
Yes. Back on the bridge where they're observing Mitchell, Spock asks if that is still Mitchell, and Mitchell creepily stares at the viewer.
Ooh.
Oh, can he see them watching him, or does he just know there's a camera there? Who knows?
Yeah, so it kind of caused me to sort of head scratch a bit later. It's like, okay, if he's actually noticing that he's being watched, like actively, it sort of suggests he has this perception of things going on elsewhere in the ship.
Yes.
But is that always on, or does he have to sort of notice it?
Who knows?
And if it's always on, or even if he has to sort of focus it, he could potentially listen in on various conversations that happen elsewhere where he's not available for.
Yes, he could just have been listening to the entire episode and we'd never know.
Yep.
The random new doctor says that Mitchell is in abnormally perfect health.
It's weird. He's so healthy, I don't know what to do with him.
Wow.
I guess we keep him here then.
Daner and Mitchell quip for a bit because she's for a couple of seconds upset about how he insulted her earlier, but then she says that it's okay because she was probably overcompensating like professional women. Yeah.
Come on, Star Trek. Why do you keep doing this to me?
I don't know. This is by far the best episode we've gotten as terms as the general women hating and misogyny.
Yeah.
Like, as soon as you put them in pants, you go from, like, this massive level where the entire episode is about weird creepiness down to this, like the episode's just has some weird creepiness in it.
More subtle, yeah.
So I guess we're improving, maybe.
But this episode was made first.
Yeah, so that doesn't bode well. Mitchell discovers that he can move the medical dials on the wall with his mind.
Makes them all go super high at first.
Yes, and then he dies for a minute, and this worries
I'm just going to die for a bit.
Daner.
I need a nap, so I'm going to be dead for a few minutes. Don't mind me.
After this, Daner decides that she wants to test his recall of some of the books he's been reading. She picks a random book and a random page for him to remember. But this is apparently the most passionate love sonnet ever written.
Whoops.
Mitchell pulls her close and refuses to let her pull away while repeatedly asking how she feels.
Well, if I was her, I'd say kind of uncomfortable.
Yeah, you'd think so, but it gets interrupted by a crewman who enters and coughs awkwardly.
Could you stop this grab-ass business here? I'm here to talk to you.
The crewman engineer reports on ship repairs. Mitchell tells him that he should check on the impulse packs because...
What are you talking about, Mitchell? You haven't looked at this stuff. And Mitchell's like, just do it.
Yes, he gets very upset and angry, and the crewman runs out to go check on the impulse engines.
Yeah.
Mitchell calls him a fool and says that he looked straight at the problem without seeing it, but that he could still see it because it was in his mind.
Obviously, Mitchell's able to pierce into people's heads and recall things that they are not actively thinking about, which is kind of impressive, and seems like he would be in a position at this point to be like, well, I kind of know exactly what all of your plans are and your thought processes, so I could just sort of do whatever I want and do it in such a way that you aren't going to be able to sort of catch on that I'm even acting strangely if I really wanted to.
Yeah, but apparently he doesn't want to.
Yeah.
In the conference room, The crewman from earlier reports that he checked on the impulse engines and they were burnt out exactly the way that Mitchell reported.
Yeah, and he has this like big prop, which is sort of looks like a weird cross between a muffler and like a giant resistor from electronics board.
Yeah, it is actually kind of a neat little doodad.
Yeah, I like it.
Dana enters and says that she is late because she was too fascinated by Mitchell. Spock angrily tells her that it's not Mitchell.
Spock is very emotional this episode.
Yeah, he's very emotional. Like, that's not Mitchell.
All the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not Mitchell.
He is concerned about what Mitchell is mutating into. Dana is angry because all these people who should be Mitchell's friends are turning against him. Scotty reports that Mitchell may have been using his mind powers to control the bridge as if the Enterprise were his plaything.
Yeah, things just kind of go weird at certain moments when he's like concentrating or looking at certain things.
Yes, he was smiling every time something weird happened on the bridge, apparently. Dana argues that a superior man could actually be wonderful and it may be the new frontier of human evolution.
Yeah, this is actually a good thing.
Everyone just stares at her until she's quiet, like awkwardly. There's no response. They just all stare at her for a while.
It's like you're not even going to like try to consider this, not going to discuss it. I know, it's kind of like real like Ubermensch stuff here, but she's trying to like get you guys not to be like murder happy here. Come on.
Yeah, which is the first time anyone's really tried not to be murder happy that we've seen on this show.
Yeah.
After the awkward silence, Sulu reports on the math of it.
Doubling exponentially.
Yes, well, not exponentially, geometrically.
Well, geometrically, yes.
Yes. The Mitchell's powers are going geometrically, which is like an awkward penny metaphor where you double a penny every day and become a millionaire.
Yep.
Apparently, they're still using pennies.
So sort of a slight diversion. I was actually reading an interesting take on the sort of doubling metaphors, where it was posed: if you have a golf ball, you double its density every hour. At what point do you start running into quote trouble? It turns out it's like about 3.5 days.
Yeah. Interesting.
Assuming you maintain the size of the golf ball, you're just increasing its mass.
So you just wind up with a super dense golf ball that destroys the planet.
Yes, and eventually the entire universe.
Oh, well, that's fun.
About 7 days in, it will be about the mass of the universe. So
Spock says that according to the math of it, in a month they will have as much in common with Mitchell as they do with mice.
Good times.
Yes, Spock recommends that they should either go to an abandoned mining outpost nearby called Delta Vega, or just kill Mitchell outright. Kirk chides Spock for not having feelings, which he's been having all episode, so...
We know you only have one feeling, but we're going to pretend you have none, so... Meh.
Spock says that if the captain of the Valiant hadn't had so many feelings, they might not have had to be destroyed.
There was also probably not a Delta Vega.
Yeah, possibly not. Kirk just orders that they set course for Delta Vega. Next captain's log. They're orbiting an uninhabited planet where they are trying to adapt mining power cells to the Enterprise to repower the engines and transport down Mitchell to maroon him there.
Mm-hmm. And it's as far as the setting of this planet, it's a automated mining outpost. So like a bunch of machines are set up and they're all doing their operations and they're mining something like lithium or something like that, right?
So I think they just say minerals.
Okay, it's kind of a cool idea and might actually be like a big thing sometime, in our own future.
It could be. They even reference that there's a pickup ship that comes every 10 years or so to just collect the minerals and leave. We cut to Mitchell in sickbay where he's using his mind to get himself a glass of water.
Ooh.
Kirk, Spock, and Dana enter just in time to see him grab the cup out of the air as it flies towards him. Mitchell says that there is now nothing that he cannot do, and some people say that makes him a monster.
Because reasons.
Apparently. Kirk asks if Mitchell can read their thoughts. He says that he can, and that Kirk is very worried about the ship, and that they would probably be wise to do what Spock is thinking and just kill him while they have the chance.
Yes. Go with Spock's plan of murdering me. Wait.
Well, he then just zaps Spock and Kirk with his mental powers, saying that he won't let them take him down to Delta Vega because he's not sure if it's the kind of planet he can use.
Well, could you at least hear us out? That will maybe prevent us from having to go that whole murder option.
Nobody wants to talk about anything because then Kirk sucker punches him in the kidney and Dana sedates him. They transport with him down to the planet.
And Mitchell also wakes up halfway on the transporter room
Well, just enough to like let him stand up so that they don't have to figure out how to transport someone lying down.
It's also a little bit of you insects and things like that sort of anger here.
On the planet, they lock up Mitchell in a convenient force field room. Daner asks Kirk if there are any other people on the planet, and Kirk says there's nobody here but us chickens. And they stare out at a really cool-looking matte painting.
It's actually one of my favorite things about the episode is that matte painting. It's just like, this is pretty awesome. It's like
that is neat.
It's sort of 60s era sci-fi goodness, just in its purest form.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of like some like Fallout, Fallout the video game looking stuff. Kirk tells one of the engineers to rig up the mining facility to explode, and they go to confront Mitchell. He throws himself at the force field, and this apparently hurts him, and his eyes briefly change back to normal.
It's like it saps all the power out of him.
Yes.
Oh, and this is where I have the name for the older doctor fellow. His name is Dr. Piper.
Piper. Okay, because we needed to remember that. Spock says when Mitchell's eyes are back to normal, he could possibly be handled, but Mitchell's eyes quickly turn silver again, and he tells them that he just keeps getting stronger.
I'm gonna Hulk out or something.
Scotty informs Kirk that they've finished making repairs to the ship, and he asks if Spock got the phaser rifle that he sent down. Kirk says that he didn't request a phaser rifle, but then Spock enters carrying a large gun.
Yes, his BFG.
Kirk yells at Spock, saying that Daner says that Mitchell is not dangerous, and asks what makes Spock right and a trained psychologist wrong. Spock says it's because she has emotions.
Well, we're trying to understand his emotions, Mitchell's, so we know what his motives are.
Yeah.
So you would think someone who is an expert in human emotions would be the person to talk to here.
Yes,
Spock.
I, the unfeeling alien, have a better understanding of humans than the person trained to understand humans.
Yep. Humans and their Earth emotions.
Yes. Kirk says nothing to this and just wanders over to the engineer, who tells him that he's finished putting in the big red button that will make the valley explode. This is never referenced again.
Yep, just in case we need a self-destruct that we never use. Hooray!
Most of the landing party leaves, and Mitchell takes this opportunity to use his mind powers to make a cable strangle the engineer to death.
So that was Kelso, I think it was?
Yes, Engineer Kelso, who I guess they're supposed to have been old friends, so I guess this is his old, turning away from humanity sort of thing.
Yes. Kelso, no! I don't care, Kelso. You might have been my friend once, but I am now beyond friendship. I am a god, and I need to kill you for some reason.
Maybe because of the big red button that they apparently aren't going to use.
Yes.
Kirk commands Daner to return to the ship. She yells that Mitchell is not dangerous, but Mitchell says that they should have killed him while they had the chance, and zaps Kirk and Spock until they're knocked out, and then waves his hand and turns off the force field.
Well, come here, Daner.
Yes, he brings Daner in to look in the mirror, where we see that her eyes have also become silver.
You are becoming as well.
Yes. Random Dr. Piper comes in later, wakes up Kirk. Kirk tells him not to wake up Spock, and he's going to go after Mitchell and Daner, who have wandered off.
Good plan.
Well, he does grab the big gun.
Yeah, so I like to see how it's going. Yeah,
and then
that's a smart move.
He tells the doctor that if he doesn't return, that they should bombard the planet with deadly neutron radiation.
And the doc's like, okay.
Don't question it. You're fine. You'll die. Cool.
Now, I would like to point out that the Dr. Piper also mentioned that everyone got knocked out by the zappy, and so he apparently woke up first, despite being kind of clearly the one who's maybe the least young and healthy.
Well, I guess the doctors just take care of themselves first.
It's like, well, I'm kind of awake. I'm going to wake myself up the rest of the way, and I'm going to go wander around until I, find the captain and then revive them.
Yes.
Because the captain is clearly incompetent at waking up.
Well, he needs to be there to tell the captain what's going on, so we have exposition.
Oh, yeah. Plot, that's what's happening.
Yeah. Daner and Mitchell are wandering through some rocks. She remarks that it would take a miracle to survive there, and Mitchell says he'll make one as he waves his hand and makes a fountain and small garden appear.
It has the big booming voice. And the garden is very 60s. It's pretty cool.
It is very 60s. Kirk awkwardly approaches, creeping through the rocks.
Creeping on people.
Mitchell senses him, and then, apparently unperturbed, just makes what he calls an apple tree, but it's some sort of alien pear-looking thing appear.
Oh, is this like a pear apple thing from like a planet they had visited to sometime in the past? And he's like,
yes, he says that I always loved these, or some such. Mitchell continues to bait Kirk, telling him to come to him, but then Mitchell tells tells Daner to go to Kirk so she can see how unimportant humans are.
Like, yeah, you can see him as an ant now, so go and look at him for a little bit so you know this.
Go see the ant. Kirk tries to convince Daner that Mitchell has grown dangerous. She argues that their evolution is good, but Kirk says that they are advancing too fast and that they lack the wisdom to use their power. And also that the human frailty that exists inside of Mitchell will still be there no matter how powerful he becomes.
Because reasons.
Well, she continues to argue, but he says that she, as a psychologist, knows the dark, ugly, savage things that are inside of humans, and that Mitchell will have no reason to keep those things hidden.
Which is actually kind of a good point.
Because no one will stop him. Yeah, I want to get back to this. This whole section is a very interesting philosophical study on how the show believes humans work. Mitchell appears. Kirk does a really cool shoulder roll and comes up firing and shoots him straight in the chest, which does nothing.
I'm immune to phaser blast.
Yes. Mitchell throws the gun away with his mind, and then manifests a grave and gravestone with Kirk's name on it.
Which is actually kind of cool.
That is kind of neat. Little tidbit. Apparently, at this point in the series, Kirk is named James R. Kirk. I couldn't find what the R is supposed to stand for at this point. It might not be anything.
Roddenberry, clearly.
Probably, actually.
Sort of an aside. The show Babylon 5, which I mentioned before. The character that was in the command of the station was Jeffrey Sinclair. The guy who took over the position after him was John Sheridan. Now, it should also be noted that the creator of the show is J. Michael Straczynski. So JS for all three names. so that's why I thought maybe it is Roddenberry.
They do like to sign their work like that. Mitchell uses his mental powers to force Kirk to kneel in front of him and tells him to pray for a quick death.
Kneel before Zod. I mean Mitchell. And it's like, all right, so Kirk is doing that kind of overacting, like someone's controlling my arm sort of things, putting his hands together and sort of praying motion.
Yes, making really awkward pain faces every time he moves.
I need to resist this pointless gesture for some reason.
Kirk points out that Mitchell keeps only referring to himself and that he will turn on Daner in the end. Saying the famous line, "You see absolute power corrupting absolutely." Daner then zaps Mitchell.
Zaps.
Both of them zap back and forth at each other for a little while, which is a little slow and awkward looking, but kind of neat, until Mitchell's eyes go back to normal. Kirk then just runs up and hits him.
Yeah, it's like, okay, now we're back to like normal punching here.
Yes, back to normal punching. They roll around on the set for a little bit until Kirk grabs a big rock and is about to bash Mitchell's head in. Then Mitchell's eyes turn silver again and he throws Kirk away.
Yes, and Kirk actually hesitates for a brief moment, which allows this transition.
Yes, kind of, I guess, reinforcing the idea that Kirk having emotions is the issue.
I guess. He's like, well, I don't really want to kill my friend. Maybe he's good now. Maybe he's not a power-mad god of some sort.
But then that moment of hesitation lets him become defeated.
Yes. Oh no!
They continue to fight, and Kirk tackles Mitchell into the grave that he made earlier. He then grabs the phaser rifle and shoots a giant rock that was hanging above the grave, and that rock falls in, apparently killing Mitchell. In one hit. Yes.
So, but I think this is the same boulder that Mitchell was earlier sort of threatening to throw at Kirk. So
yeah, it's just kind of been up there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Chekhov's boulder.
Apparently, they just needed to try throwing a rock at him.
Have you tried hitting him with a rock? Not yet. Try that. See if it works. Okay.
It worked. Hooray. Daner says that she's sorry, but that Kirk can't know what it's like to almost be a god. She then dies.
Yep, I'm dead now. Bye.
Back on the bridge, Kirk notes down that he wants to give commendations to both Daner and Mitchell because what happened to him was not his fault.
Yes, they died in the line of duty sort of thing.
Yes. Spock says that he felt for Mitchell, and Kirk says that there may be hope for Spock after all. The end.
Well, you're all about murdering him earlier. You were kind of angry about it.
Well, I guess this is just the entire episode is a character growth moment for Spock.
Yes. He's learning to be in tune with that random bit of ancestry's human side, I guess.
Apparently just those weird emotions that he doesn't know what to do with.
Yes. he's conflicted, like Mitchell is sometimes.
So, first ever episode made was the first one to show on BBC, so I guess it can also be looked at as an introduction to the series.
Mm-hmm.
What did you think?
I overall kind of enjoyed it. There's sure campiness and moments, but it's especially compared to the first two, it's definitely an overall improvement for me. Sure, some of the philosophy I'm like about, but overall I found myself having a positive impression, and I'm not sure what else to sort of say, sort of detail the exact why. Just sort of, there's a lot of, I guess, trying to put this into good words here. I can speak good. I guess most of the things that really attracted to me this episode were more the, not necessarily what's going on or the why, but the feel of things. This has felt more like a science fiction show than the first two, where it's like Monster of the Week sort of feeling. This is like, okay, we got some, going out into space, we're encountering something weird happens, and we kind of have to make some decisions about it. As opposed to, okay, we're going to make some decisions about it, but they're already pretty much, predetermined.
Yeah, I'll agree that's probably the best episode we've seen so far out of the three. And they do make some actual attempts to think about what they're doing, which is a massive improvement on the last two.
So maybe it's just sort of like, well, it's good in comparison. Maybe down the line I'll be like, about this even more. But so it's on an upswing. So hooray!
Yes. So we are once again, though, confronted with what if man was given godlike powers, which I'm a little sick of.
Yeah.
I was sick of it before Charlie X. I was definitely sick of it after Charlie X.
It's like, maybe we're all spoiled by Q, who I think was the episode on TNG where Q shows up and gives Riker powers.
Yeah, I think that one did definitely stand out to me as kind of a contrast to this one. And I think it really speaks to the different philosophies that original series and Next Generation have when it comes to just humanity in general.
Yes.
And I realized last episode we referenced Q a few times, but for anyone who isn't as familiar with Star Trek, especially Next Generation, Q is Next Generation's resident godlike.
Yes, he's a being that has seemingly limitless powers, who can just sort of click his fingers together and make people vanish, send ships halfway across the universe, create things, cause things to appear, and basically do whatever he likes.
Yeah, I thought it was important to get that out there in case someone's unfamiliar. He's kind of my personal reference point for godlike entities throughout this series.
And I kind of like that in TNG and to a lesser extent the DS9 and Voyager, he was sort of the go-to sort of option when they wanted to have a plot of this sort, which kind of gave them a opportunity to sort of flesh him out as a character. And sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought there. Go ahead.
That's fine. Yeah, you're right. They give him actual character development because he keeps showing up, whereas when they want to use this trope on original series, so far we've had 2 different people with god powers, and I can think of at least 3 more offhand.
And how many of them remained repeating characters?
I think 0.
Yep. So it's like, well, I guess this person we don't really know at all shows up with this power, and we don't really know what they're about, so we just kind of have to guess by the random, weird banter they have occasionally about being at the academy, or, this is what I did on this planet, where there was nobody there, and I talked to a computer, for sure, yeah. Yeah,
it works a little better when you can just have them randomly show up, instead of having to explain their backstory for 20 minutes.
Oh, yeah, here's, Reginald Barkley, he's shown up a few times. He had that weird incident with the transporter. That was weird. And he's kind of just awkward around everybody. And now we've given him super mind powers. Oh,
yes. As far as I can remember, original series only really has 1 recurring character who shows up twice. Possibly more, because I believe there's a Klingon commander who may show up multiple times. I'm not as familiar with him.
Well, the repeated character you're speaking of is Mud, correct?
Yes.
As far as the Klingon commanders, there's, I guess, the trio that show up in DS9, Kang, Koloth, and another one. I don't remember if they have more than 1 episode in the original series, though.
I can't remember.
Yeah.
But yes, so The episode we were actually talking about.
Yes. Back to, where no man has begun before.
Yes, I think there's some interesting themes to get into, and I want to spend a decent amount of time on those because there's definitely more to talk about in this episode than the last two.
Yeah.
But I wanted to spend a second touching on ESP. Because it's something that's actually kind of fallen out of favor as we've moved out of the 60s and 70s.
Mm-hmm.
The ESP, standing for extrasensory perception, is kind of just a blanket term actually developed in like the 1930s for anything that seems to be an unexplained mental power. So precognition or telepathy or anything that Professor Xavier can do in the X-Men.
Like teach a class, wait.
Yes. This was studied in the 1930s, and those studies were later largely debunked, but then there was sort of an increased interest in it in the 1960s, slightly due to like some psychology that got mixed in there. Freud kind of had an idea of like extrasensory like dreaming, that could give you some insight into people's mental awareness, and there were some similar things around there. It wasn't referenced specifically, but I believe that the rise of the psychoactive drug may have had something to do with this.
Like, I can see through time, man. You're just on some acid there, man. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, well, I've actually been reading this really interesting book called How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. Which
I know that guy.
Yeah, I'd really, really recommend it to anyone who's interested in that kind of thing, where he talks about psychedelics in the 60s and how they were very actually closely linked to psychology. We really only kind of remember them as this like party drug, the like expand your mind psychedelic hippie movement thing. But when they were first introduced, they were really being used to kind of test the bounds of human consciousness in this sort of similar way.
Let's throw things into a tizzy and see what happens, sort of thing.
Basically. And also Daner, we were talking about her name earlier. I found that the cards that you see all the time when they're doing ESP tests, you may remember these from the beginning of Ghostbusters.
Yes, the one guy who, Venkman, right, was testing the two students, and the guy, keeps guessing correctly what's on the card while he shocks the guy. But the girl, anytime she guesses, she always gets it wrong. But he's like, "Oh, you're good, very good." He puts the card down without showing them.
So yeah, you've seen these. They have like the three wavy lines and the triangle and the square, very simple shapes. Yes. Those are called apparently Zaner cards.
Zaner cards. So
I was wondering if Daner was possibly a reference.
Good question.
So yeah, there was a big rise in interest in ESP in the 60s. It appears in a lot of science fiction from this era, especially if you read some of the pulp stuff. I believe that like Heinlein and Asimov use it as a reoccurring theme many times. So it's something that's been around. And
you got yourself the mule and things like that showing up at the Foundation era as well, with Asimov. And it's like, okay, you got these strange unknowable powers that are beyond most sorts of science here. It's sort of that last unknown frontier. It's like there's space, the final frontier, but there's the mind, the unknown one.
It actually gets really into this thing that we see in the 90s and early 2000 era of TV sci-fi. You have the reoccurring theme of we only use 10% of our brains.
Yes, which is complete bunk, but
yes, complete rubbish. But that was kind of their version of what if ESP.
As far as like a genre of, quote, science fiction is kind of interesting. It's not necessarily one I'm super interested in because it kind of effectively plays the role of magic, which can be either very, very useful for, depending on what your genre is, or can be just sort of a crutch to, well, we need to have this happen, so we're going to sort of wave our hands and just have it sort of be a thing, which is kind of what the, original series sort of mind powers tends to be.
Yeah, though in this one specifically, this transitions nicely into the philosophical discussion we can have around the man becomes God themes that they're working with here. In this episode specifically, I would argue that it is being used less as kind of whatever magical thing we need it to be, and more as kind of a stand-in for nuclear armament.
A little bit, yeah. It's like, well, you now have this power that is beyond all comprehension in its potency. What do you do with it? Is it safe to keep it around? Is it something we should be using? Is it something that we should be fearful of and trying to destroy? And so you got a lot of sort of, This is kind of out of the bag now. There's not a whole lot we can do about it.
Yeah, and this is like, middle of the Cold War. So nuclear weapons are fairly new, very scary. Everyone's thinking about them. And you have a lot of these themes going through a lot of literature at the time of like what happens when you give a human godlike abilities, like the ability to destroy basically the entire planet.
The power of God wielded by man.
And this is really something, this like whole idea of the jump in technological evolution, because here it's referenced as just skipping over natural human evolution. Like this is a point that we would have gotten to eventually, but this has kind of jump started Mitchell and Dahner's abilities, and now they have more power than they know what to do with. But if they'd gotten to it over the slow natural course of human progression, they would have kind of grown into them.
Yes. This sort of theme shows up in other science fiction, and it's always kind of one of the ones that I'm kind of have a good affinity for. One of the plot threads in Stargate, SG-1, is sort of this exact notion. There's several alien races or human offshoots that have advanced technology, but understand that Earth is not ready for it yet. It's like we have learned some stuff about you, and we know that you are not capable of having this kind of power and using it responsibly. So we're going to sort of hold back until you prove yourself a bit, either through just natural evolution or demonstrating in a concrete fashion that you're able to, handle this stuff without destroying yourselves or everybody.
Yeah, and this is a very reoccurring theme in Star Trek specifically, because it's kind of the entire idea behind the Prime Directive, which we haven't really gotten to yet.
Yes, I don't think it's shown up at the show yet. So
yeah, it hasn't shown up in the show. So just a general overview is basically it's the non-interference policy. Don't mess with civilizations that are at a lower technological level than you are.
And there's also sort of a corollary, don't interfere in the internal, evolution of anybody in general, outside of like normal diplomatic sort of stuff.
Yeah, and this like really goes into they always have the cautionary tale sort of associated with this idea, especially when it's going that direction. This one is kind of we have someone who attained a greater amount of power, now what do we do with them? When it's going the other direction of should we give people greater amounts of power, it's almost always accompanied by here's when we did this in the past and they didn't know what to do with it and destroyed themselves.
Yes. And so this is a different, the same situation from the opposite perspective. We are the ones being granted this ultimate power, and we're going to probably destroy ourselves. The Valiant did, after all.
Yes, it's a weird one, like, to me, because this whole show is kind of about man's glorious, technologically driven future. But you still hit this thing of once we obtain a certain amount of power, we become dangerous.
So what's that power level? More or less than 9,000.
Well, you hit that quote, it's a really old quote that's a favorite of most people. The absolute power corrupts absolutely. And there's like a whole thing. So I think I forgot to write it down, but the general entire thing is power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. All of history's great men were also bad men.
For the most part, yeah.
Which I like this is a little bit of a personal thing, and I did some digging. I may have had some biased research on my part because I kind of hate this idea. I found a paper by a Professor Catherine A. DeKells.
Yeah, can't say I'm familiar.
Yeah, this is a little bit obscure. I kind of stumbled on it when I was researching the power corrupts trope. But she did a little bit of research that basically they have ways to kind of prime people to think of themselves as powerful. Like, I believe in this case they had them either write a story about a normal day or a story about a day that they felt like they were powerful. So they prime a certain number of people to think they're powerful and a certain number of people to not, as kind of a control group. And then they give them this kind of choice where they can either do something like selfishly. They can, in this case, they can take between like 1 and 10 points. And the more points you have, more likely you are to win a certain amount of money when they do a drawing later. But cumulatively, if you take too many points, which they haven't said what are, the entire thing's called off and no one can win any money.
Sort of how would you press your advantage?
Yeah, so it's do you want to give yourself more, like giving yourself more of a chance to win has a greater chance of hurting everyone in general. And they kind of did this a lot. In this case, they did it along with this this survey that they gave people that was able to kind of judge their existing moral tendencies. So they did this thing, and people who had kind of a moral identity that was considered a little bit more self-centered, when they were primed, normally everyone kind of took around the same number of points. It was somewhere around like 5 or 6. When people were primed to be powerful, people with a slightly more selfish moral identity tended to take slightly more points, more in the like 7 to 8 range. But people who had tested more kind of community-minded identity tended to take way closer to the average, like 4 or 5 points.
It's almost like they're immune to this priming.
Well, not even immune. It went down for them slightly. Everyone got closer to the average. The general conclusion of the paper here was that power doesn't corrupt, it just heightens whatever pre-existing tendencies are already present.
Which I guess in a sort of the historical framing of it, that a lot of the great men throughout history were also bad men. It's sort of, it's sort of implying with the power corrupts sort of phrasing that these people were good at some point but became bad when they gained the power. Maybe the opposite is true, that they were bad people to begin with in some fashion and then used that to obtain that power.
Yes.
To press that advantage.
There was a quote from Abraham Lincoln that kept coming up when I was researching this. Is nearly all men can stand adversity, but if you want to test a man's character, give him power. So this was an interesting one to me because I only just recently learned this. The standards thing that is referenced to uphold this power corrupts narrative is the Stanford prison experiment.
Oh yes, that's a lot of BS.
Yeah, that was recently debunked.
Yep.
For possibly coaching by the researchers, which I actually hadn't heard of until I was studying this week.
I actually just recently ran into this, a bit of information myself, that they were basically sort of trying to convince the people in some of the roles to basically act a certain way. It's like, no, this is how you're going to act. And then they went in and go out and act just like that. Be kind of an asshole guard. Okay, I'll do that. That's part of the thing we're supposed to be doing here.
Yeah, so that kind of just invalidates the whole study.
Well, I guess people are good at acting.
And it was interesting to me because I was watching this with my girlfriend, and from the minute Mitchell comes on screen, it's like, that guy's a jerk.
Yep.
It's like he does everything to be a horrible person through the entire episode.
Yeah, that weird sort of flirting and then an insulting comment towards dinner, and then just sort of being just generally insufferable. It's like, okay, and sorry, he's starting getting his powers, and he's just like, oh, I'm just kind of better than you now. Hooray! Like, well, in maybe some ways you could say, like, okay, maybe this power is like some entity taking over his mind, but then you think about it, no, he's just kind of an ass.
Yeah, and even the stuff they referenced from him earlier when he's old friends with Kirk.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, you used sex against your teacher.
Yeah.
That's kind of a jerk move.
So it was just interesting. Later, he has the whole thing of power has corrupted him. It's like, no, he's the same guy all the way through.
Yeah, he was kind of a jerk face. Forget him.
Yeah.
You get those Ephesians over here to abduct him with their big giant head.
Come on. They can go be friends on Charlie's planet.
Well, maybe that's what they should do. Anytime they run into a supreme godlike entity that they can't really do anything with, it's like, well, we got this planned over here. People like you that, you could go hang out with and be with other people of your own kind. And, you might come over and try to destroy the universe someday, but, at least you'll have someone to talk to, right?
Yeah, so we earlier referenced the Q Who episode in Next Gen.
Q gives Riker the powers of the Q.
Yeah, and that one is sort of they're going off of a similar vein. It's kind of like Riker keeps saying he doesn't want to be a Q, and Q says that if he can resist using his powers, he'll leave him be.
Yes, he'll leave humanity forever and let them do their thing without his interference ever again forever, and he doesn't. Anyway.
Yeah, but the thing with that is Riker is continually tempted to use his powers because he's a good good person.
Yes, like, okay, I can make Jordy not blind. I could save this child's life. I could do all these sorts of other things.
Yeah, he's like genuinely tortured just because there's bad stuff happening in front of me and I could do something to correct it. That just exemplified for me the like key philosophical difference that you hit between original series and Next Generation. Because original series is like working off of this idea that humans are basically evil.
Life is brutish, short, and ugly, and so are we.
Yeah, I was about to mention Hobbes. So we're getting into some philosophy stuff, so a little bit of explanation. You have the Hobbesian viewpoint of society, which is that as humans existed in nature, life was brutal, brutish, short, just hugely unpleasant.
It's just a bad time for everybody.
Humans are basically like not great at the core, but we self-organize into social groups that uphold this thing called the social contract.
It's the general rules of our livings.
Yeah, I'm not going to steal from you because stealing from you means you're going to steal from me, and that's just, bad for everyone. So nobody winds up stealing from anybody.
Hopefully.
Well, the I don't know. I have some fundamental problems with the Hobbesian viewpoint.
It's very simplistic to a certain degree, that it sort of ignores things like people realizing, well, we got this social contract, how can I use that to my advantage? And also assumes that if people weren't able to ever communicate with each other, that they would just sort of be assholes to each other.
It's also, like, apropos to this episode, very much assumes that everyone is working from a very even power level.
And everyone is equally, a straight tens D&D character.
Yes.
Of the same class. All level 1.
Basically. Which they reference very specifically when Kirk says that now that Mitchell has godlike powers, no one can stop him from doing the dark things that are inside of humans.
So it was all about the threat of retaliation keeping everyone in this paradise of the future in check.
Apparently.
Not like their internal moral compass or greater understanding of the cosmos, or just generally being not crappy people.
And he also, so since we're talking about the philosophy, earlier we referenced Spinoza as a work that Mitchell was reading and said that he fundamentally disagreed with. So how familiar are you with Spinoza?
I was much more familiar with Hobbes and Spinoza, so I could look it up real quick, but I think you probably have better notes.
I wasn't very familiar with him, but the kind, so this is coming from, some very base research just to understand what they were going for. But he basically did a lot of work to kind of rationalize the concept of God. He was by no means an atheist, but he really had this thing of like God exists as a set of kind of universal laws that he doesn't care about people specifically. It's just more of a what we might now call kind of a natural idea that nature exists, it follows these laws, and trying to fight or change it is kind of pointless.
So God is the distant sort of maybe cause or observer or rule maker, but not necessarily this thing that would be, more in tune with our day to day.
Yeah, he's out there doing his own thing. And he hated prayer. Spinoza was very against prayer specifically because the idea that you would ask basically the universe to change just for you was the height of hubris.
Bend to my will, all-powerful entity that can do whatever it wants, I guess.
Yes.
Do what I say.
So the basic idea is the way to be happy in Spinoza's world is to understand the way the universe functions, figure out what your role in that is, and fulfill that role.
Seems pretty straightforward, I guess.
Yeah.
Assuming you have a role. Done.
So it's kind of an interesting one that the godlike character openly rejects this philosophy.
You gotta be like worshiping and stuff, and I guess that kind of explains why he's like, kneel before Zod with Kirk there, and forces him to pray. It's like, well, I guess that's kind of fitting with your philosophy here, I guess, guy.
Yeah, you could read it both directions, which is kind of interesting, because he wants people to directly pray to him, but he also wants to be able to change the way the universe functions.
Yes.
He's not happy to be just a cog in the machine. He wants to break the whole thing.
He wants to be a prime mover.
Yeah.
Where did I come up with that? Where did that term come from?
I don't know. It sounds very familiar.
I think it was from a Foglio comic of some sort. Anyway, Zap Guns for Hire or something like that.
So yeah, this whole episode to me is it's very much going off of this humans are kind of at our core bad, and power gives you a way to express that badness.
I have to disagree with that. I have to say that some people are kind of bad. Some of them are very good. But it's what we do with our situations that makes us sort of fall on one side or the other. In general, I tend to perceive the world as being mostly filled with good people. Just a lot of them are being abused by bad people who are in the minority.
Yeah, I'd say that I share that general worldview, which is why I don't know, this was a very good episode. It gives you a lot to dig into, but I very much disagree with the basic philosophy it's sending.
Yes.
And up to and including, especially referencing your Hobbesian viewpoints, Daner fighting against the more powerful Mitchell destroys herself. Mm-hmm. Which Hobbes had a whole thing on how you shouldn't fight the powerful because no matter how horrible a powerful leader is, they are standing between you and chaos.
Well, if there does come a point where a powerful leader is much worse than the chaos that would be existing, which you seem to be suggesting, Mr. Hobbes, is just this awful, awful thing that will be forever terrible and will never be replaced with a new social contract that's actually good and all that sort of stuff. So, yeah.
Well, now you're getting into Rousseau.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm drifting.
Yes. Well, that's fine. I don't think we should. Rousseau wasn't really used in this episode very much. We should just mention that they're often cited as kind of philosophical opposites.
Your Enlightenment thinkers of the early phase there.
But what's interesting to me too is Hobbes was living during the English Civil War, which was this horrible, horrible, brutal conflict when they were fighting between the Parliament and the monarchy.
You got some Oliver Cromwells going on and fun stuff like that, right?
Yeah, and his whole thing was very much influenced by this idea that anything is better than this, which kind of an interesting one coming out of the First World War II and then Cold War era that's influencing our Star Trek series here.
Yes.
That the powerful, this stuff is going to happen. Like, bad things are just, waiting there to happen, and you have to work really, really hard to prevent them.
Be constantly in fear of this, unknowable darkness creeping up from the edges of our world that could threaten to overwhelm us and take everything that you hold dear away. Oh, God!
Well, I think that was all of my notes on the philosophy, unless you had anything else to dive into.
Actually, that hits up most of the things here. I guess I could speak on once again on the ESP powers, which, whenever they kind of come up in science fiction, I am kind of reminded of a book series I rather enjoyed by, I believe, Julian May. Are you familiar with her at all?
No.
She's wrote a series of books, some set in sort of present/future, and some set 6 million years ago, where there is people from our future time traveling back to basically escape the post-human contact with aliens, crazy future world. The general theme of all of that, though, is that humans are developing in the present/future series metapsychic powers. So basically various, quote, ESP sort of things. And the aliens in that world also all have these powers already, and they're sort of waiting for humanity to get their shit together and unlock their full potential there. Call out and say, hey, we're here. Can we talk? But they sort of break down, especially in the quote, Pliocene epoch stories, the psychic powers into sort of certain categories. And it's kind of, interesting to sort of look over the list here. The sort of prime ones are telepathy, so mind-to-mind communication, creativity, the ability to create illusions and manipulate energy so you can sort of we now look like we're not ourselves, we're like somebody else. Or maybe we look like butterflies, or suddenly there's a picture, everyone looks over there and sees a building or a monster or something like that. All sorts of fun stuff. And we become powerful enough with this, you can start shooting lightning bolts because it's just enough light and energy here that I'm now able to energize stuff and actually get stuff moving. Then you got coercion, which doesn't show up very often in these sort of stories, where basically it's mind control. It's I'm going to make you do things, and usually it shows up I'm sort of telekinetically moving your arms to do this. But this would be no, I'm going to go into your head and make you think this is a good idea to do. Then you got psychokinesis, or PK, which is all about the moving things around and your cups from across the room. Then you got far-seeing, which is all about looking across the world and all sorts of things. And you can also sometimes use telepathy and that sort of thing. It can also be sort of turned into, I can see the future as well, because, space and time being linked. From there is also something called redaction, which is basically psychic healing, where you think really hard and you just start to feel better, or cause someone else to feel better. So you can get sort of in these settings, sort of psychic doctors who go around and, heal people, or people that are able to basically recover from life-threatening wounds just by sort of activating their power. It's like, well, you may have shot me 50 times, but, well, you should have shot me 51 times, then you would have killed me, because I'm now back to full health. Hooray! There's a couple sort of extra ones, that are sort of attached to all of this here, but there's also de-jumping, which is basically teleportation. So you beam yourself from one place to another. You can either do this with just your mind or with your actual physical body as well. It's just pretty crazy stuff. It's sort of like the far edge, only the most powerful can do that in this particular series. So that's sort of the general types of metapsychic powers in that series. And so it's sort of fun to sort of think about, okay, when Mitchell sort of creates this garden here, is he using creativity powers and sort of summoning up enough energy to form matter, or is he moving the atoms themselves to assemble this magical garden, in which case it's more of a kinesis sort of telekinetic power there. Just sort of me being really geeky about all this, it's kind of a useful sort of framework into sort of dividing up these mind powers so they're a little bit more consumable in a sensible, reasonable sort of fashion, even if I don't in general believe in them.
Yeah, it's interesting when you laid out the list things, because they are kind of a thing that have existed around for quite a while, just these concepts.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of them could kind of be linked back to sort of the more shamanic traditions.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's just kind of speaks to this sort of idea of consciousness and what it can do.
What is its capabilities?
As like throughout history, we started seeing research on the ESP stuff in the early 1900s, but like all through history, you've kind of had these ideas of humans with special abilities or healing knowledge or future predictions.
Yes, the seers of Greece and Rome. You got your Tibetan monks who are able to control their body temperatures and survive in crazy environments, and you got all sorts of other things and stories about people who are able to call down the lightning or something like that.
Yeah, I'd actually argue, we can go into this as much or as little as we want because it's somewhat unrelated, but it does seem a bit like we are actually living in one of the lulls in this kind of mental thinking, because the idea of, mind expansion and what your brain can do and like special human abilities has kind of fallen by the wayside recently, and when you do see it, especially in things like the superhero genre, that's usually a holdover from the 60s.
Yeah.
And it's also almost invariably now explained more scientifically.
It's like, oh yes, this person has this crazy special genetic thing that lets them tap into this particular power, and it's all just sort of a different, sort of framing for this, hard science, which we just don't have the time to go into, of course, that it just looks like it's magical powers or your mind, moving matter over there.
Yeah, which is like you saw some of the beginnings of the demystification in like this episode where they're going into the science of ESP.
Yeah.
But there's still not really, it still references like we don't understand how this works. Mm-hmm. It's just we know some things about it in a scientific way, but we can't explain how it functions. It's still sort of mystical.
Yeah, we've done the measurements. We don't have a working theory yet.
Yeah, so it's just, well, I guess we'll see an evolution as we move into more modern science fiction as time goes on. But like the demystification is an interesting one. Looking at this episode, it's like they could have spent the entire episode explaining exactly how his powers work, but then they wouldn't have really been able to discuss them.
Yes, it's okay. We now know how they work. Now, what does this mean? Well, too late. The episode's over.
Yeah. We need an awkward metaphor that we can use to defeat him.
Knowledge about psychic powers. No, it doesn't work. Power. Well, we'll talk about power. Okay, that works.
Yes.
So I guess the lesson for today is that, if, only give unlimited power to people who are pretty cool.
Yes.
Do make sure they're pretty cool, guys.
Well, we've gone quite a bit over where we usually do time, but I do have my couple of little random fun facts.
And by the way, just to finish my thought there, Geplin's pretty cool. Give him ultimate power.
I appreciate the vote of confidence.
So the fun facts.
Yes. Unfortunately, no alternate names for this episode, which I was disappointed by. But there was a lot of production problems. The silver eyes that the two actors were wearing in this series.
They're like two contact lenses with like foil between them, right?
Yes, the little like crumpled up tinfoil.
Real great for the eyes, eh?
Yeah, they were outdated and dangerous even by the special effects standards of the time.
Whoops.
You couldn't wear them for very long without your eyes starting to physically heat up, which is not good for them.
Nope.
And neither of them could see. They had like a little pinhole in the middle. In the episode, Mitchell keeps kind of staring down his nose in like, I am haughty and godlike, I guess, trying to look away. But it's actually because he can't see unless he's like staring down.
So it's like, well, I'm going to raise my head up and look down at you. And oh, yes, I look like kind of a, a haughty god person, which I guess is fitting. But I also need to know where you're actually standing here. So this works out.
Yes, they apparently had to memorize their blocking beforehand and then put the contacts in and then try to remember where they needed to go during a scene.
Yeah.
Including in that little garden area, apparently they spent a great deal of time kind of wandering around to get shots of them looking at everything in awe, and they kept slipping into the fountain.
Whoops.
Yes. The other thing that happened is, since this was like one of the first production things that they did with this, the sound stage that they'd been setting up in had wasps in the ceiling.
Whoops.
And some like the hot lights or all the people moving around or something caused one of the wasp nests to fall onto the set during filming.
Huh.
Yeah, so several people involved got stung. Apparently, according to one of the sources I was reading, this happened while both of them had their contacts in. So you had two people who couldn't see and everyone else freaking out about a swarm of wasps.
Okay, so don't panic, but I know you can't see, but there's a bunch of wasps around you. Could you slowly walk over this way, please?
Yes. Yes, I guess it happened on a Friday, and then they had the whole weekend to kind of recover, but Shatner still needed additional makeup to cover up wasp stings. Yeah, so, not the best start to their filming. And
there was production overruns as far as timing goes. They're supposed to be like 7 days. They end up taking like 9.
Yeah, there's kind of a little in-industry story where they were waiting to finish up the pilot. They had this is Desilu Studios. So Lucy is in the other room in fancy dress with a ton of business executives waiting for them to finish so they can do the episode pilot wrap part.
Yep.
And they're running over. And she keeps coming in and asking them, like, when are we going to finish? And one of the producers finally says, okay, if you want us to finish, grab that broom and sweep in front of the camera so we can get a smooth tracking shot for this last thing we need to do. So apparently the last shot they got in the thing, I'm not sure which one it was, had actual Lucy from I Love Lucy sweeping a stage brush in front of the camera dolly in fancy dress just so they could finish this thing that was already over budget.
Wow. I have a feeling she probably wasn't super happy about doing this.
Apparently this was a very good studio for this kind of thing, and it's really unfortunate that it couldn't become more successful with this. Everyone references it as like it was created and run by creatives and actors. So they were very good people to work for as creatives and actors, but they unfortunately weren't a very successful studio. And they were later sold to Paramount, which is why we now kind of remember Star Trek being under the Paramount family of products.
And, situations sort of like that have kind of been attempted a few times over. I think the most famous example would be Skywalker Ranch, I believe, right?
Yes.
Where it's like George Lucas is like, well, I'm a creator type. I want to have this sort of special type, of place where people like me can come and we can work on our films. And it's not quite a studio, but it's sort of a hangout spot in a way.
Yeah, more of a creative space. So something like this that was, Star Trek was over time and over budget for all 3 years that it ran.
Mm-hmm.
and it was almost canceled every single season.
Until it was.
So we'll get to more of that as we go on, because there are some interesting stories with the cancellation and kind of the forming of the Star Trek fandom. But I don't know if something like this could have happened at a more corporate type studio.
Well, certainly not. It would have been maybe well, okay, we've managed to get through a season, but you just constantly overrun, behind schedule, your costs are too high, all these other problems. And so why should we even bother giving you a second chance? In a corporate world where, oftentimes shows were canceled for much less, this wouldn't have survived anywhere else.
Yeah, probably not.
Oh, I got two more quick things. So, when Kirk was worried about Mitchell, he mentioned something happening where they were on Deneb 4. That was also the location where Encounter at Farpoint takes place.
Oh, yes. Interesting.
Which, how does that work? I don't know. Also, I read somewhere that the big fist fight between Kirk and Mitchell might have been the reason that the show was even picked up in the first place. It's okay, you got a lot of the science fiction stuff going on, but where's the action? Where's the intensity? Oh, they're having a fist fight now. Okay, that works.
Yeah, that's true. I did kind of forget to mention that the reason that they even needed a second pilot was because the studio executives called the first pilot too cerebral. So they did end on this big fist fight action scene.
Okay, we need the thing that will sell the show. Let's do it.
By modern standards, I guess I'm going to use the term action loosely.
Yeah. Well, there's a phaser fire and some thrown punches. It's actiony.
That's true. So it's not as sci-fi as the first pilot was, but it's more sci-fi than some of the other stuff to be in this show.
So that's the episode.
Yes. Next time we get to Naked Time.
Yes.
How familiar are you with the Naked Time there?
Well, that's the one where they, everyone gets infected with some sort of intoxications, and suddenly their inhibitions are out the window.
Exactly. Yes, the entire crew gets drunk, as far as I remember. I remember bits and pieces from this. This is where they get the Sulu sword fighting with his shirt off.
Action, adventure, sword fighting.
I think I probably remember more of this episode than some of the other ones.
Yeah. And, we'll get to it maybe next time, but this also relates to another TNG episode in a way.
Yes, we'll probably do some comparison when we get there next week. That's it for us. So I hope that you have enjoyed.
Oh, I certainly did. How about you?
I did.
Hooray! Next time on Watchers of Tomorrow, the Naked Time will be with us. Yes. So tune in then as we lose our inhibitions. You have been listening to Watchers of Tomorrow, a podcast on science fiction media. You may find Gepwin on youtube.com/Gepwin and on Twitter at Gepwin, spelled Gepwin. You may find me, Dr. Isix, on youtube.com/Dr. Isix, spelled DRIZIXS, and Twitter at IsixLP. Music is Waveform by DRKRN and Maury's Principle by the same. If you enjoyed our podcast, make sure to subscribe for more, and share the experience with your friends, families, enemies, and alien overlords. If you feel you are suffering from transporter syndrome, please be aware that the next time you step off the transporter, the you that is will no longer exist.